I'd be glad to do that.
Okay, go ahead and pray, Bruce, if you don't mind.
Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this this time that we have that we can gather together. We thank you, Lord, for Mark and for Heart of the World bringing these courses. We ask now that you'd open our hearts and our minds to what you would have us to learn, and that you would be with Mark as he delivers this message tonight, this lesson. Just bless each one of us that we might hear and receive from you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bruce. So let me share my screen. And I want to share screen 2. Can you see that? All right. So again, I put the little anchor there. We're going to look at, again, Melanie has some sailing background. Bruce does. I don't know, Irma or Monica, if you have any kind of sailing background, it's kind of this just blew me away, the terms used in this. Incredible. So we'll, all righty. So Melanie, you mind starting reading?
Sure, I'll read Acts 27, 1-2. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius, and embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica.
Okay, so again, from last week, the Roman ruler, procurator, Festus, and the king, the last king of Israel, well, he wasn't the godly king, but King Agrippa, who's Herod's grandson, ended up saying, had this guy not appealed to Rome, he might have been set free. So they finally, but he's appealed to Rome and he's going to go to Rome. And last week we had a real good look at Roman law, Pax Romana, right? Festus told Agrippa, I don't know what charge to write against this guy. They're talking about something about their religious beliefs. And how do I send a guy to Caesar without a charge? And so he asked him to kind of hear Paul, and he was glad to hear Paul. And it's kind of an interesting story. But one thing he said, it's not our custom or not Roman law that a person be delivered for destruction without confronting his accusers face to face. And this is kind of the basis of our law. If you get arrested in our country, you're supposed to have everyone has their day in court, correctly? That's the ideal situation. I'm kind of wondering today where we're going on this. And notice I put in your notes who's sailing for Italy is going to be we. That's going to be Luke, right? So we have Luke back in here. And also accompanying is this Aristarchus. You probably said it better than I did, Melanie. But we met him back in Acts 19. He was present at the riot in Ephesus. And then we're told in the next chapter, when Paul, remember after the riots, he went back to Macedonia and he accompanied Paul and others as they were leaving, headed back towards Jerusalem. So it's kind of interesting in the latter part of this text here, we're hearing people's names again and again. A lot of them are referred to in the epistles too. He'll mention that Aristarchus is not one of those, but we've met him before. So they're going to sail for Italy, and he uses this word that was Italy, first time I think that's used in the Bible. Paul and some other prisoners, a man named Julius, not much is known about him, but he's with the Augustan cohort. And I wrote in that it's a unit of the Roman army stationed in Syria, named after the emperor. It was kind of like it was probably kind of a special unit. They were named after Augustine. You might, if you're familiar, actually, we're going to talk about, I'm sorry, it's Sicily. We're not talking about Sicily, Dave, but we're talking about Malta and Crete. Is that and Cyprus? Is that on the German side there was the Hermann Göring division there. They were supposed to be this elite division fighting for anyway. So this is a division or a unit of, named after Augustine. So we put to sea, and interesting enough, here's a ship from I don't know, Adramyttium. That blew me away. I Googled that, and that's actually a ancient city in Asia, modern day Edremit, Turkey. No reason to know that in a sense, but what does it say about the world? So here we have independent, again, under Pax Romana, Roman peace, you had commercial sailing vessels. So here's a sailing vessel from this town's a western, kind of near Troas, where Paul had the vision to the Macedonian call. So here's a ship from that area headed, and they get on board of this ship, and so they're headed off to Italy. Any questions on that or comments? I just found that very interesting. Luke is a detailed person, right? He's going to talk about the ships from this area here. They're going to get on another ship, and we're going to see where that's from too. All righty. So Bruce, you mind reading?
Not at all.
Okay.
Acts 27, 3-5. And the next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and receive care. When we had put to sea from there, we sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea, which is off Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia.
Mm-hmm. So they sailed, only took one day to get from Caesarea to Sidon. Sidon is a town in modern day Lebanon. It's known in the biblical. It was there obviously there in Jesus's day. This is, 30 years after Jesus, but Jesus prophesied about Tyre and Sidon, right? And so Julius treated Paul kindly. It's kind of interesting that we're going to see Paul had a lot of favor with Julius. Obviously, Paul had favor with Festus and somewhat Agrippa. And so they land in Sidon, and he gives Paul liberty. He can go with his friends, receive care. I guess they didn't worry about him running away, or whatever, because we're going to see later they were scared of prisoners escaping, and the soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners. And so when we put to sea from there, we sailed under the shelter, and I put a footnote there, and that's my first anchor. Some modern translators say under the lee of Cyprus. And leeward means the winds are behind you. There's headwinds and leeward winds. And I've got a slide showing the differences, though, how you sail. Bruce and Melanie, you remember that sailing into the wind. There's a different way of sailing into the wind than there is the thing. So they're going is actually, I'll go to the map here. Whoops. And so you can see our little arch at the bottom. They left Caesarea, which is on this map is called part of Syria, and they go into the town of Sidon. I got covered up. And so they begin to sail between Cyprus and you see Cilicia, I'm sorry, remember that's where Paul's from, and they end up in this area of Myra, which is over here. Remember, this is kind of the area where Paul did his first missionary journey. Paul was from Tarsus or whatever. So here's where they start sailing back, and they're sailing between the island. Again, they're getting shelter from the island, from the currents, and we're going to see the winds become a big thing. So there's a reason, even in that day. I have up there, if you can see up there in the red area, I have Adramyttium there. You can see where it is. It's kind of close to Troas, closer probably to Pergium, one of the 7 cities. But that's where that boat's from. Isn't that interesting? So here's a commercial boat from this area that the Roman kind of picked. He's catching a ride on this, like flying United Airlines or something. All righty, let's see. Irma, you mind reading?
Certainly. Acts 27, 6-8. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy, and he put us on board. When we had sailed slowly many days and arrived with difficulty off Syndius, the wind not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete, all of Salmone. Passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near the city of Lycia.
Mm-hmm. So again, they've got to Sidon, and what does Sidon was an important port. So what does he do? He finds an Alexandrian ship. Where's Alexandria?
Egypt.
Yeah, named after Alexander. It's in Egypt, still a city in northern at the delta of the Nile River. So he finds another. It tells you about the economy of the day, right? In the society. So here's a centurion. He's charged with getting in. He finds a ship that's going to get me to Sidon. I'm going to fly from El Paso to Dallas, and I can get about anywhere in the world from Dallas, right? And is how we do it when we live in El Paso. I went to Tampa, Florida, had to fly to Dallas to get to Tampa or whatever. So he finds an Alexandrian ship, that's going to Italy, puts us on board, and then they begin to run into difficulty here, okay? They're starting to have problems with the wind here, and we're going to see why. And again, he's going to sail under the shelter. Again, this is that leeward thing. I gave you the modern names of Salamoni, and I gave you the modern name of Fair Havens. Let's see, I think I've got them on the map. Okay, so he takes off from Myra there in the middle, and they begin to have problems sailing. And so they start to run into some difficulty, and they're going to start to run into some bad winds here. And they finally get near, and they're trying to sail close to Crete to stay out of the, big old Mediterranean Sea. Any questions or comments at this point? Again, I love Luke's thing. There they are on the map where they went. All right, Monica.
Acts 27, 9-12. Now, when much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. And because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, opening toward the southwest and northwest, and winter there.
Mm-hmm. So again, now they're having some difficulty. You see, this gets pretty treacherous, this trip. And he's saying sailing was now dangerous because the fast, and it doesn't refer to what fast this is, but it's the fast in the later part of the year, because there's weather comes in during we see the winter. They're talking about the winter. The sailing season, in a sense, changes. I don't know, with modern ships, we probably don't have too much of a sailing season problem, but there were times you have sailing season here. And so Paul says, I think that this could be a disaster, guys. And I think this is going to be, the takeoff at this time is not really pretty good. And notice he talks about it. Not only we're going to lose the cargo, the ship, but also we're going to die and stuff like this. Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded. I like this, right? The helmsman, again, that's a nautical term, right? The helmsman's the guy that steers the ship, right? And the owner. So they're saying, no, his guy's just some kind of lawyer or, some guy from Israel. He doesn't know anything about sailing. We think we're going to be okay. This is not a good place to winter in because of the currents, etc. I don't think there's ice there. Those of us that grew up in the north, you have to take your boats out in the winter because the ice will crush your boat if you don't take it out in the winter. But they want to reach a place called Phoenix. Anyone know what the name of Phoenix's airport is? Phoenix, Arizona's airport is? Sky Harbor. So, another place on Crete, someplace that we can winter where it's safe and go. So when they decide to send Paul, it's probably not the best time of year to send him. Again, so here they're going along thing, and you see a place called Fair Havens. And a haven is what? A haven, we call it a safe haven now, but that was a seaport term. There's a place in Psalms where it says that he will lead them to us a safe haven or whatever. So if we can get to this area, we'll kind of winter there, then we'll head by Achaia, Greece there, and go up the Adriatic to Rome. All right, back to you, Melanie.
Acts 25, 16-18. When the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their desire, putting out to sea, they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous
That word. It's okay.
headwind arose, called Erosidon. And when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive. And running under the shelter of the island of Clauda, we secured the ship with difficulty.
So Paul's told them, I perceive we're going to have disaster. The helmsman and owner say we can go on. So the wind begins to blow softly. So they're supposing, remember I highlighted that word because remember one of the times it was used is when Paul was attacked in the temple in Jerusalem. They had supposed he had bought someone into the temple because they'd seen him in Jerusalem. I'm not sure if that wasn't aristocrats, but it was someone else. Supposing, again, supposing is the opposite of faith. Okay. And a lot of time we suppose, we have a term for assuming, assuming makes something of you and me, and supposing is almost as bad, that they do it. So they think they're going to be okay. And so they're sailing close to Crete, but not long, this tempestuous wind. Oh man, Shakespeare wrote a play called The Tempest, right?
Mhm.
It's about a storm, a tempest. We don't use that word too much. And it's called the Euroclide. A very interesting, did I not put this on here? I think I've got it on there. The Euroclide is a weather thing that comes in the winter, and it's winds come from like Spain and go towards Alexandria, Egypt. So they're coming from kind of the northwest and going east. Okay. The Euroclide is mentioned by Herman Melville in one of his books, Moby Dick, I think chapter 2. And it's also mentioned by Rudyard Kipling in a book of his about the Roman invasion of England that he writes. So this is kind of a well-known phenomenon. So the ship was caught and could not head into the wind. And again, that is a nautical term trying to fight against the headwind. If the winds become so strong, I don't care what you do, we're going to look at what you do in headwinds, you can't let her go. So we let her drive. Basically, now the ship's just being taken wherever the wind wants her to go. And again, running under the shelter of an island, again, trying to find safety close to shore. We secured the skiff with difficulty. What's a skiff?
That's a little boat they tow behind, like you say, a lifeboat, but they tow it behind the big ship.
Mhm.
And when they get in bad wind, then they try to pull it up, maybe even raise it up onto the ship because it acts as a wind anchor. It drags them. It'll fill up with water and drag them back.
It is like you said, we call them lifeboats now. It's also some of the big ships would anchor outside the harbors and you travel back and forth via the small boat going back and forth. Most naval ships have a skiff or two on them, right? They'll have, the captain's boat or whatever. So if they're in a harbor, they can get on that boat, or if they're at sea, they can put that boat down and go visit another ship or whatever. And so because the winds are coming back, just as like I said, securing or battening down the hatches is a nautical term also. So they're securing this skiff, and it wasn't the easiest thing to do. The winds are so bad now that we're trying to bring that thing in. Okay, so here I've got, this map is an interesting map. This map is from like a yachting society, okay? So this is a non-biblical map or whatever, but these are the winds, prevailing winds in the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, and you can see where I put the blue arrows where they started. You have some, so you can see why they kind of went north of, I don't know if you can see my mouse here, why they went north of Cyprus here, because the winds, those are the leeward winds, right? If they would have went this way, you start hitting these headwinds. So you're kind of going along these winds, sailing ships, again, you have a diesel motor, it doesn't matter, but you kind of have to go along. They get up here and they're trying to get around the Grecian Peninsula. So they begin their journey around here, and there's a lot of different winds there, but now they're starting to run into winds. Just a little sailing lesson tonight, okay? If you are heading into a headwind, they call it tacking. And what you have to do is you have to sail at 45-degree angles. The wind's coming this way, you use the wind to push you this way. You can go forward a little bit, and then you got to go back. It takes like 3 times as long because this is the only way you can make progress On the right, if you have a tailwind, that's when it's fun, when you have a tailwind. When I was in college and had these little sunfish, we'd put that sail out there and get that wind behind you, and you go sideways against you, and you had to lay out over the side and hold that sail with all you have so the boat wouldn't tip over. So you can sail against the wind, but if the winds get too strong, it becomes impossible to sail against the wind. Do the drawings make sense? I mean, this is not going to be on the final or anything, but it's just to show you that Luke knows what he's talking about. And here is the Euroclide. Okay, that's on the same map, but you see it comes from the northwest and begins to go back. So it begins to change all of these winds. So you see where they're in this area trying to get over here, they're going to start having problems, right? Gee, who would have thunk it? All right, here's the island of Crete. This is Fair Havens there, trying to get out. All right, I'm sorry, who read last?
Where's that little island that they landed on? Or the
Claudia?
city?
Claudia? Right
Yeah.
there.
Where?
Right down.
I can't see your cursor.
Okay, the blue arrow, look south of it. And there's a red dot.
Okay, there it is.
Yeah, the modern name is Gavdos, but that's the island of Claudia.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I love maps.
Where's Phoenix?
I don't know where Phoenix is. That I don't
Because
know.
that was on the island of Crete, right? They left Fairhaven trying to
Yeah,
get to
so,
Phoenix, just 40
no.
miles away.
Yeah. So they're having a lot of difficulty here, and it's only going to get worse. Okay. So they started off kind of doing okay, and it's getting difficult, and now it's a mess. So I can't remember who read last.
I did.
Okay. Irma, do you mind reading?
Yes. Acts 27:17 through 20. When they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship. And fearing lest they should run aground on the citrus sands, they struck sail and were so driven. And because we were exceedingly tempest tossed, the next day they lightened the load. On the third day, we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up.
Remember, God told Paul, "Be of good cheer. You spoke for me in Jerusalem. You're going to speak in Rome." He didn't know what he was signing up for, did he? So this is when they had taken the skiff on board, they used the cables, and that's interchangeable with ropes. They use the ropes to undergird the ship. And what they do here is they tie the ship together. Just they run ropes under to try and hold together. If it starts smashing against stuff, the wood won't come apart. We have a modern thing that we do this, and I can't remember what it's calling, but ships, steel ships become magnetic in the water, something about the ions in the water. Now, if you're a naval ship, there's a reason you don't want to be magnetic. Anyone know why you wouldn't want to be magnetic if you're a naval ship?
You don't want to attract mines.
You don't want to attract the mines. The mines are defined metal, right? And if you're magnetic, you're going to draw them out. So that it's frapping is what it's called. So they have to run these cables, steel cables around the ship like this, and then they put a charge through it to demine the ship. Again, it's not going to be on your final, but I think it's interesting. But they tie these cables trying to hold the boat together. And then I looked up citrus sands, and what are citrus sands? And lo and behold, there's some this little area here, I don't know if you can see the red writing here. This is modern day Libya. These are actually sandbars out there in the Mediterranean Sea. So, you know, if you've ever seen a modern sea chart, they're going to give you the depths and stuff like that. It's important, like the captain of the Costa Concordia learned when he was running by the city to kind of toot his horn and stuff like that. He ran into rocks and sunk $1 billion ship, right? So you got to know these things. So like I said, either Luke's very familiar or he learned very quickly about lightning things. So that they're worried about striking these sands. So as they're driven, again, they're tempest, that's the term, tempest toss. We began to lighten the ship. Again, that's a nautical term. How do you lighten the ship? You throw away the cargo, right? Remember what did Paul say? I think we're going to lose cargo, we're going to lose the ship and stuff like this. And on the third day, we threw the ship's tackle. What's the ship's tackle?
That would be those cables, and that would be all the rest of the rope and
Rope
and extra
the sail.
sails and everything they have to, anything that they needed that they could get rid of, they threw it
Yeah.
away.
They're in a desperate situation here. And then again, it says neither sun nor stars. So it's so cloudy. They're not seeing the sun in the daytime, no stars at night. And again, they navigate by stars, right? So they're probably lost at this point. Not really sure. Well, we know they're lost. We're going to see. I don't have to prophesy that it's in the chapter because they see land, they don't know where it is. Okay. And the winds are beating them, you know, and so all hope is given up that we're going to be saved. Basically, oh man. But Paul, that's the thing. Monica?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think it says in here, I don't recall it, but remember when he was in prison and they sang and praised God all night? I wonder, it doesn't talk about that here, but surely they did. Wouldn't you say that they
I
would?
would think so. I think, you know, Paul was pretty focused. He was a purposeful person. I think he honored God. And I think we're going to see kind of the fruit of that here, that you're probably right. Yeah, it doesn't say exactly what he did in prison. It didn't say what he did for those 2 years under Festus. He just had a lot of freedom. So let's see. Okay, Monica?
Acts 27:21-24. But after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. And indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you.
Yeah. So they're not eating, probably because it's too rough. If you're familiar with the song of the Edmund Fitzgerald, there's a thing when the cook comes out and says, sorry guys, it's too rough to feed you. They can't cook because it's so rough. And on these type of wooden ships, they didn't cook anyhow because they were worried about burning the ships down. But it gets so rough you can't eat, or maybe they are fasting. Melanie, you asked, but and maybe Paul's the one fasting here. I don't know.
You know, victuals may have been part of what they threw overboard too.
Well, they're going to throw it over. We're going to see in the next slide or so. They do throw their last of their food over. Okay. So, but again, here's Paul. This reminds me of when he said, hey, you're not going to dismiss me from Philippi in secret. They need to come. The city manager needs to come and tell me to leave. But he said, you guys, you should have listened to me. You know, I told you about this disaster in laws, but now I'm going to encourage you that, you know, there will be no loss of life. So, you know, an angel of the Lord spoke to me and said, don't be afraid, Paul. So Paul gets, you know, praying, fasting, Melody, you know, is probably right. You must be brought before Caesar. God said he was going to go speak to Caesar. So this tempest is not going to get in the way, right? We're going to see the soldiers later want to kill the prisoners when they wreck because they're afraid they'll escape, but that's not going to happen because Paul's going to go before Caesar because that's God's plan. And I love this that the angel says that God has granted you all that sail with you. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
You know, I had to ponder that one for a minute.
Well, you look at his relationship, you know, being out here with these men and this trip as it's gone so far, you know, this is several days, right? And
we know they've had 14 days. Yeah, this is taking it and said after a long, you know, Luke's usually the next day, but yeah, there's a time frame here.
Its relationships are built, I'm sure.
Oh,
God
yeah.
has granted you all who sail with you. That is a neat saying.
It is neat that, you know, he felt like everyone was going to die. And now he said, you know, not only you're going to go speak before Caesar because I said it, but the angel said, God has granted you all those that sail with you. Yeah. And I think there's a part of the, you know, the salt, we're the salt of the earth. In some ways, we're a preservative. I mean, we can't guarantee people's salvation, but, you know, when the righteous rule, you know, the people rejoice. If the righteous rule, the average person can benefit from that, even if they're not righteous, you know. But That'd be a heavy thing. I'm going to grant you the lives of all these people.
Well, we need some righteous to rule today then, don't we?
Yep.
Okay. And we're back to Melanie.
Acts 27:25 through 28. Therefore, take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. Now, when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land. And they took some soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they took soundings again and found it to be 15 fathoms.
So again, Paul declares his faith. I believe it'll be just as God told me. But God also, he's saying, he told me we got to run aground on a certain island. Okay. And now they've been 2 weeks, a fortnight, right? Driven up and down the Adriatic Sea because they don't have control over the boat. They've lost a lot of the tackle. They can't go against the headwind. And interesting enough, about midnight, the sailor sensed, I quoted that on your fill in the blank. There is a sense of sailors knowing the sea, isn't there? You know, hunters kind of know, this is the, where I'm going to find the good. Fishermen kind of tend to know where to find the fish. And sailors they somehow feel like they're drawing towards some land. Remember, they have no idea where they're at. And so they took soundings. That is another nautical term, right? A sounding is you find out how deep it is, okay? And they found it to be 20 fathoms. Fathom is a modern term, but the Greek word is orguia, and it literally means, remember, this is a cubit. This is the fathom, both arms stretched out, which is roughly average man, probably 6 feet, right? So he's not only using that, he's using nautical terms for depth or whatever, for depth. 20 fathoms would be 120 feet, which is not that shallow. I would, but they had a sense, and when they had gone a little further, they took soundings again, and it would be 15 fathoms. So it's gone to 90 feet. So now they know they're not in the middle of the deep Adriatic Sea, but they're finding close to land. Anyone know what Mark Twain's name came from?
The depth.
Yeah, is it two or
They would throw out they would Mark Twain was a depth. I can't remember.
Yeah, when they would do the soundings, they would say Mark, in this case 20, Mark 15. And it may be 2, I don't remember, it may be 6. Anyway, that was Mark Twain, and Samuel Clemens took his literary name from that term right there. It's actually a nautical thing. So isn't that interesting? Again, there's this, Luke's recording this. They took their soundings and man, we're 120 feet deep. And they took it again, they're 15, they're sensing we're going near land.
When you look where Paul grew up, I mean, if he was from Troas, I mean, we know he went to Jerusalem at some point, but he's from Troas, and Troas is right on the sea, really.
He's from Tarsus. He's from Tarsus.
I'm sorry, from Tarsus. I meant Tarsus.
Yeah, I know.
But Tarsus is on the sea too, or right close to the sea.
Yes. So
he probably had a lot of nautical experience growing up. Probably even fishing in the Mediterranean Sea there. And then when he went to Jerusalem, he probably still had some experience. Anyway, I'm sure that he had, and I would think that those travelers, like Luke was a traveler, Luke was a physician. He probably had people of that day probably had a lot of nautical experience if they traveled at all, because of the hazards and stuff. They had to know. They had to be part of the crew. Even as passengers, they had a role to play.
Good point. And in Tarsus, I told you, it literally it means smelter. So his city was probably a smelter town, and they probably took iron. They probably brought iron ore in and sent iron stuff out. Kind of reminds me of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald again.
Yeah.
20,000 tons of old iron ore, or however it is. Let's see. I can't remember who read last.
Melanie did. I think
it's you, Bruce.
Then fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea, under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall off.
Mhm. So now they're fearing that they're going to run aground on rocks to go to Deptford. So what they do is they drop 4 anchors off the stern. Again, stern is a nautical term, right? Back of the boat, after stern. So they drop these 4 anchors to try and hold the boat. Most of us are used to small boats where 1 anchor, if you're fishing, will hold you. But we're going to see this is not a tiny little boat. Okay, there's actually, spoiler alert, there's 276 people on this boat of soldiers, prisoners, and sailors. Okay, so they put these anchors to hold them and praying that the day would come. Interesting enough, I think there is a scripture that says the sailors understand the workings of God. You know, they're out there in the sea, and you're out in this immense sea, probably feeling alone, and it's between you and the sky, you see God, and they've seen the winds and stuff like that. And so in Jonah's story, remember, they fell into a tempest too, and they were praying, and they said, "Go get that sleep. Why are you asleep, sleeper? Get up here and pray to your God." And he tells them, "I'm a Hebrew. I serve the living God." And then they all get afraid, and actually, they said, "What should we do?" He says, "Throw me in the sea." And they try and row harder. It says they're trying, they want to spare Jonah, and they can't. And then they pray to God, Jehovah, and say, "Forgive us for this." They throw him in the sea, and anyhow, there's kind of a revival on the boat there. And as the sailors seeking to escape, now I put in the words underlined are the ones in your fill in the blank. The ones that are gold, not underlined, I've used another word. And there's a word I used in your notes there. Not escape. What were they doing? They were abandoning the ship, weren't they? They were going to try and just take care of themselves, and to heck with everybody on board. So they're going to lower the skiff. They're going to get that skiff they brought on board, and they're going to lower it in under the pretense of putting some anchors out on the prow. And prow is another nautical term. Prow means bow, and it's probably only used in nautical. I've never heard this term before. I had to look it up and found out, oh, it is the bow of the boat. Okay. If you're, a Navy person, they'll call it the prow sometimes. And so these sailors on the boat, part of the crew, start to let down this boat, saying, "We're going to go put some more anchors on the front to hold us." But their plan is to escape, and hopefully, because they're afraid the ship's going to run into rocks and break up, and maybe on a smaller boat they'll make it. And so Paul says to the centurion and soldiers, "Unless these men stay on the ship, you cannot be saved." God said, "I'll spare everybody, but they got to be apart." So the soldiers cut away the ropes and let the skiff fall off. So not only have they gotten rid of the tackle, they've gotten rid of the cargo, now they're getting rid of the lifeboat, aren't they? So it's like, this is all in.
But at least they listened to Paul this time.
Well, you're going
to,
like you said, who was talking about relationships earlier? Paul seemed to have the favor of this man here, and he respected Paul. Even though he didn't listen to him, he was willing to listen to the helmsman and owner over him. I think we're going to see that he grew to trust Paul. Obviously, Paul said not leave, left, and it was a nightmare. So I think it might have opened his eyes. All righty. Is it you, Monica, or who reads next?
I think I do.
Okay, Irma, go ahead.
Acts 27:33-35. And as the day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food, saying, "Today is the 14th day you have waited and continued without food and eaten nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat.
Mm-hmm. So here, I answered my question earlier. He talked about 14 days without food. They all look straight, it says here. They've all been fasting, because of their desperate situation. So Paul wakes up and said, well, about dawn, he wakes up and says, go ahead and take some food today because you're going to need this strength. There's another story in the Bible about God giving someone food to give them strength. Old Testament. I love these trivia questions. Elijah in the cave, right? When he's running from,
Oh, yes.
In the cave.
yeah. And then God gives him the food and says, go to Syria and anoint Hazael, king of something, do this, and then go anoint your replacement, Elijah, when you're out there. And so he broke bread, he gave it kind of like a communion thing. We're going to break bread, we're going to give it to God, and, putting our life in God's hands, I guess. All right, Monica.
Okay. Acts 24:36-40. Then they were all encouraged and also took food themselves. And in all, we were 276 persons on the ship. So when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and threw out the wheat into the sea. When it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they observed a bay with a beach, onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And they let go the anchors and left them in the sea. Meanwhile, losing the rudder ropes, and they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore.
Mm-hmm. So they ate the food and they're encouraged. And Luke tells us 276 people on this boat. This is no tiny little craft. It's a good sized boat. Modern day aircraft carrier has about 5,000 people on board, but this is no small boat. I don't know if I've ever been I've been on ferry boats, etc. I don't know if I've ever been on a ship this big. And when they eat, and this is where they're throwing everything off now, guys. Okay, they lighten the ship again. That's another thing. And they threw out the wheat. So this is it. This is our last recourse here. And they didn't. So the day rises and they see land. They don't recognize it again. They have no idea where they are. It's going to be multiple. We'll find out in chapter 28. And some funny things will happen there. But they observed a bay with the beach, and this is what they want to do. We want to run the ship into it. Their only hope now is to just run the ship into the sand and get off the ship. And so they let go the anchors, and look, they left them in the sea. They don't even need the anchors anymore. They know the ship's done. So they cut loose the anchors or whatever. They loose the rudder ropes, and they hoist the mainsail again as a term. If you're in a small sailboat, the big sail is the mainsail. You might have a jib or can't remember what's the other name for the up front, but the mainsail.
Boom.
Yeah, boom or jib. Yeah, boom. Yeah, and so they're putting it and letting it push the to the wind and made for shore. Okay, they set it to the wind, and this is our only hope of survival. Remember Paul's thing. I perceive there'll be loss of cargo and the ship and lives, and yet God has come back and said, I'm going to spare all the lives. And Paul says you got to run into an island. So here they are going to run into this land. Again, they don't even know what land it is. Melanie, back to you.
Acts 27:41-42. But striking a place where the two seas meet, they ran the ship aground, and the prow struck fast and remained immovable. But the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves, and the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape.
Mm-hmm. So they find this place that seemed like an ideal place, and they run aground, and they struck the bow here, prow fast. In other words, they ran the ground hard. Okay, and the idea of doing that is you're grounding the ship to try and save the ship from being washed out to sea again. And it remained immovable, but the stern's being broken up by the violence of the waves. You can hear these waves crashing against it, and it starts to tear apart the ship they're on. And so the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners. It doesn't say how many prisoners are on board, lest any of them should swim away and escape. Why would they want to kill the prisoners?
They would be
killed.
responsible.
Yeah, they're culpable if the prisoners get away. We know that. And so that's their plan. But God's granting life, remember, because Paul's got to go to Rome to go to Caesar. So I think, Bruce, you're at that last slide.
Acts 27:43-44. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on parts of the ship. And so it was that they all escaped safely to land.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? But someone talked earlier about the relationship with Paul and the centurion. The centurion wanted to save Paul. I think there's a respect here, realizes what he's doing. Who knows? Paul's probably witnessed him for during 14 days and nights and stuff like that about the Lord, broke bread in front of him, thank God and stuff. So the centurion's going to not let them kill the prisoners because he wants to save Paul. And so he commands that, hey, if you can swim, jump overboard now and get to the land, go to shore. And the rest, not everyone can swim. Get boards, and what you do, you see people, pictures on boats, if they don't have a life thing, they're hanging on a door or they're hanging on a piece of the ship or whatever, just like you kind of see in the movies, A Night to Remember or Titanic or something like that, people hanging on to whatever they could. And so it was, they all escaped safely to the land. Kind of amazing little story, isn't it? I mean, just God's faithfulness reigns through it. Just a curious insight into the culture of the day. Here's sailors going to save themselves and abandon the ship. Here's soldiers going to kill people to save themselves. And yet God works it all out in his providence, right? That Paul is going to go to Rome and he's going to get to speak before Caesar. You can't thwart God's plans, can you? Storms, shipwrecks, snake bites, which are going to come in the next chapter, and anything can't happen.
That's what I was going to say. Instead of the end of the chapter, you should have put something like in the old movies, remember? Hang on until next week and see what happens when they land on Malta and what happens, like the old movies used to.
Yeah. And they find that first thing they find out, oh, we're on a place called Malta. We're on another island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. By the way, Mediterranean comes from the Latin middle of the world, right? Because that was the middle of the known world. Media terra, Mediterranean Sea. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Enjoyed this chapter. I thought it was very interesting.
Was very interesting.
A lot of those nautical terms, like you said.
Yeah, it just kind of amazed me. So there's a little bit of the journey. So next week will be the journey from Malta to Rome. And then he's going to talk to members of the church in Rome. And then it's going to leave us with Paul living in an apartment, kind of under custody, but being able to, again, under the Pax Romana, Roman peace, he's able to kind of have liberty until he's heard. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great lesson. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Bye, everybody.
Good night. Let me see how I stop share and end.
Stay cool.
Stay cool.